Original Oh, there we are.
Goal achieved. Success.
Hi, everybody. Hey, Dallas Winston, Bloody Elbow. This is the Vivisection for Bellator 130. I'm joined by Zane Simon. Zane, what's up, bro?
Not much, bro. How you doing?
I'm all right. I'm all right. It's Michigan. It's cold. You can see my
Yeah.
breath. Maybe
Seattle,
not.
it's rainy.
Seattle, it's rainy. It's better than Michigan. I can see
Yes, it
my
is.
breath in here, so either it's too cold or death is soon to visit.
Both could be both. I used to live in Michigan. I would prefer death at this point to moving
Yeah,
back.
I was gonna say I'm kind of indifferent, whichever it is. Um, So Bellator 130. Emmanuel Newton headlining the card, back in action quickly after. I'm not sure how to describe his performance against Joey Beltran. Ended
Bad.
well, knockout. There were some questionable tactics, I'll say, in the beginning of that fight. Yeah.
I would say it was just. I mean, from if I'm Emmanuel Newton, that's a fight I want to forget as soon as possible. A whole thing. I would.
Expound, expound
Found.
analytically.
Well, it was one of those fights that really showed his limitations when he's working as a straightforward kickboxer. In that he's not a high power guy, and his output can be really inconsistent, and he's very easy to bully. I mean, a guy like Beltran, who has a good chin because Newton doesn't have a ton of power, um, can just walk Newton down and bully him inside and rough him up. I mean, it was sort of like the first round was even. The second round, it started to become very clearly around. Beltran was clearly winning the fight, and Newton just kind of ran out of ideas as he realized that his kickboxing wasn't effective. It just sort of became, well, I better pull out some more spinning stuff and see if one of these is going to land. And it did. And he's really good at the spinning techniques. He's got that awkward sort of half beat style that throws guys off, but it was a clear demonstration that a fighter who's willing to take a little bit of punishment can really walk him down and work him over and force his game to break down to really basic sort of Hail Mary stuff.
What's kind of interesting though is he fought Attila twice and King Mo twice, and those are both guys who would seem to have that same ability to walk straight forward and keep him in the wheelhouse. And what surprised me about the Beltran fight is that his unorthodox and to me it's a broken rhythm style. I mean, when we say
Mm-hmm.
unorthodox, usually we think of Machida. It's not flashy, but it is awkward as hell from a rhythm, timing, and from an angle standpoint.
Yeah.
But he used that style to, what's the word I want to use, neutralize or to
Yeah.
address the fact that they were going to come right at him. And against Joey Beltran, not only did that not work very well, but he kept allowing himself to be, number one, backed up into the cage. And what really shocked me is that with his back on the cage and Joey in striking range, he would still throw spinning back kicks and spinning shit, which is risky.
Yeah. Well, and I think the big reason for that is that neither Newton nor Vey are pressure fighters. They both tend to want to sit back at range. I mean,
Mo and Bay.
King Mo and Vey rather. Neither King Mo nor Vey are pressure fighters. King Mo especially is tends to be a counter kickboxer or a counter boxer when he's fighting at range. He's looking to, waiting for you to come in and try to counter off you, which when you're a fighter who fights at an awkward rhythm is incredibly hard to counter. And Vey as well is, I mean, he's mostly kind of a relaxed, I'm just going to fight at a really even pace, kind of. I mean, he does grind a bit, but he's not like a high output, you know, in your face aggressive fighter, really at all. And
Excellent point, especially on Mo. They had little spurts where I think he was frustrated and
yeah,
did take that tactic. And actually, he did okay with it.
yeah.
But point well taken in that, as far as close range pressure fighters, Joey Beltran's on the far end of the spectrum for heavyweights for sure.
I mean, Beltran, he just showed that because he's got such a great chin. I mean, Beltran basically, very rarely has been knocked out in his career. It's usually only by the heaviest punchers out there.
What was just Newton now, and before that it was just LeVar Johnson, right?
Um, I think did Beltran didn't he fight I want to say Rampage or something?
Oh yeah, Rampage got him left hook.
Yeah. And that's, there's no shame in that. But yeah, it's otherwise it's LeVar Johnson and Rampage and then Emmanuel Newton and that back fist. I mean, that there's so much power, and when that hits you, and it's a strike that people aren't expecting, so it usually catches guys totally cold and unbraced and unprepared. So it's not like the kind of knockout where you're like, oh, he's chinny, he got knocked out by that spinning back fist. It's a punch that can knock out anyone when it catches them the way it caught him.
And those three knockouts might not seem that impressive, I guess, as a credit to Joey. But if you think about how he puts his head down and wades forward against everybody,
Yeah, I
when
mean,
you're jogging into a punch, that tends to increase the impact a little bit
yeah,
too.
I mean, you're talking about somebody who's fought Matt Mitrione, Pat Barry, Stipe Miocic, James Tahuna, Fabio Maldonado. He's fought a whole bunch of guys who have the power to knock, most fighters out cold, and he's only got 3 knockouts to guys who punch really, really hard,
And he
or
was
two
doing pretty
knockouts
well.
to guys that punch really hard, and then one flash KO to somebody that can catch people with the flash KO. But it's so, I mean, I think that Beltran really demonstrated quite well that if you can be a swarming pressure fighter, you can really cause Newton big problems.
And I also think, not that this is the Joey Beltran episode, but he has not made major improvements because you don't see him using a lot of new tools and tricks. But I do think he's gone back to what he's good at and
Yeah.
gotten a little bit better at it. Just decided I'm a swarming pressure fighter. So, all right, as usual, we're going to touch on a couple bouts on the Bellator 130 undercard. That will begin at 7 o'clock Eastern. This is Friday night, October 24th. It'll stream live on Spike.com and Bloody Elbow. The first, and we always talk about this. Sometimes we don't get the fight order straight because we don't know what the hell it is. So bear with us.
Yeah.
These guys are definitely on the undercard, maybe not in this order. First up in our conversation is Davi Ramos versus David Rickles. David Rickles, of course, the caveman who had a title shot, I believe, was that a title shot against Chandler?
Uh, I don't
While you're
even know
confirming
that.
that, either
I
way,
think it was.
I believe it was too. And I mean, a gamer to the core. Real hard-nosed guy. Uh, I and others have been inclined to call him a grinder, which I still think is correct, but people get the
Yeah.
image of a boring lay and pray guy, and that's not it at all. He's a swarming pressure fighter. I mean, as far as lightweights go, he's really, really diverse too. We've seen him work off his back and look pretty confident there, and his wrestling, both offensively and defensively, have been pretty surprisingly solid, although his strength is obviously standing up. Hard-nosed guy, not huge power, but the kind of guy who will just keep coming at you almost in the Diaz fashion, where he'll just keep slinging leather in your face, and they all hurt, and eventually one's going to put you down. Had a tough road, suffered a couple losses, and I wasn't quite as familiar with Davi Ramos as yourself, so tell us what the caveman is up against here.
Yeah, Davi Ramos is most notably a very, very good no-gi grappler, like championship level no-gi grappler. Also just a very good competitive black belt grappler. Brazilian powerhouse of a guy. I believe he's a Hickson Gracie black belt. And he's just, even for BJJ, he's incredibly aggressive. Watched a little bit of highlight tape on him, and it's all just like swarming back takes to rear naked chokes and heel hooks and leg locks, and just really strong, built like a little fire plug. And I watched a little of his MMA fighting, and he fights like a high-end BJJ grappler in MMA, which is to say that he just goes balls out with his striking. That's kind of the classic. Are you a great BJJ grappler? Well, what are you gonna do? You're just gonna like go out there and sling leather at people until somebody falls down.
In my opinion, a totally legitimate strategy until you develop your striking, right?
Well, yeah, and it's also a thing where you do that because you're not worried about getting taken down. I mean, if you're a great grappler, it's actually a pretty good idea to just be a hyper aggressive, stupidly aggressive striker because you know that if somebody takes you down, you're going to have the advantage there anyway.
For the first time it might not be, but for me, the precedent for that was when Dean Lister fought former Red Devil fighter in Pride.
Oh,
Good striker, fought in the UFC. This is where you're supposed to do your job and step in and just complete my thoughts before I even.
I'm not that up on Dean Lister's career. I'm
And
gonna
Amar Suluev, I believe it was
Amar Suluev.
Amar
Yeah.
Suluev. That's what he did in Pride. Suluev was a real feisty guy, well-rounded, and Lister, and, known as a grappler, just went balls out on the feet with kicks, and that's become a popular strategy. And to me, the key is when what you're doing, and kind of what we both agreed, is you're leaving yourself a little bit open to takedowns, because not
Mhm.
only do you not care, you'd prefer that. They get in trouble sometimes when they leave themselves defensively susceptible to strikes, though. It's
Yeah.
hard to go balls out and say, take me down all you want, but just don't punch me in the face back.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly been a classic problem is that you get guys who are really susceptible to taking to eating counter shots and coming up on the regional scene they don't face many strikers good enough to punish them there so they don't learn to close that gap. And then the other part that often ends up being a problem is when they eventually end up meeting a really high-end wrestler who knows how to shut down grappling, then they get taken down and they just get laid on and ground out for a whole round and they end up having to rely on their striking and then that they're in trouble.
So this should actually be a really compelling matchup, because
Yeah.
two highly aggressive guys. Rickles is usually game to go anywhere and everywhere, but he's probably going to have to morph into more of a sprawl and brawl fighter here. So
Hmm.
I would probably lean towards Rickles just by kind of by default until Davi Ramos proves himself. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean this is definitely I don't mind the matchup. It's maybe I think it's a step too soon for Ramos. I think Bellator would have been better to bring him up against somebody that they knew would be like maybe a seasoned vet who's fought for them a bit but isn't the most winning guy, somebody who hasn't had success up at the very top of their tournaments and see if he can beat that and build him up just a little more. Because I do think that I mean he's only 4-0 in his career, and I think Rickles is probably just a little too big a test. His striking's just a little too sharp, his wrestling's just a little too on point, his grappling's just a little too there. It's a kind of fight that I could easily see Ramos either getting TKO'd or losing a very tough decision, but it's a get over fight. I mean, it's also the big opportunity to come in at 4-0 in your career and beat somebody that people know and are familiar with, and immediately become a pushable, promotable fighter for your next time out.
I probably would have matched Ramos up with Nate Jolly, who's 2 fights ahead, lightweight, not as big as a name, big
Yeah.
of a name, but decent guy, really experienced, more of a wrestling guy. And we talked about this briefly before, and that's matching. Rickles is, he's been a main card fighter the whole time. He fought for a title before. He's got a good name, so I don't want to give him a can, but it seems like you're sacrificing something for sure when you match Ramos up with Rickles, where I would have liked to see Ramos versus Jolly. That way it's kind of a win-win, where this seems like, in a sense, a little bit of a lose-lose. Anyway, next one we're going to touch on is Derek, is it Bohe?
I gotta assume He could be Bohai. I, either way,
Either way.
Bohi
Heavyweight.
Bohai.
And I was going to mention Alex Huddleston, his opponent. These are heavyweights. Huddleston, I believe, is a ATT guy. I don't know if you can.
Huddleston, he's listed out of K2L Grindhouse, but he could easily be splitting time at ATT or have moved to ATT recently.
And I believe he trains a little bit with Bobby Lashley, and he's been really lauded for his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu acumen. That was a little bit of a surprise because I just wasn't overly familiar with him. And what, Bohe, you said he's a bloody elbow reader?
Yeah, we got to give him a shout out, especially through TP Grant, one of our writers, was kind enough to drop in that Bohe's a bloody elbow or a regular bloody elbow reader, and so I mean, we got to support him full force,
He's,
obviously.
he's probably going to win then,
Yeah, I mean,
based on that credential.
there's no two ways about it. Seriously.
Next up is Aaron Darrow or Darrow versus Nate Jolly. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but Nate Jolly is just worth mentioning. And then up next, Anthony Dizzy or Deasy versus Darian Caldwell, and Caldwell has got some serious credentials too.
Yeah, Caldwell's I believe it's former NCAA Division I national champion. I mean, there's not you don't get much better than that.
I mean,
And
Olympics is the only thing better than that, right?
yeah, exactly. He is he's definitely one of the better wrestlers to get into. Yeah, he was going for the Olympic team, but he's had injuries. Like throughout his college career, he was sort of plagued by injuries, even. And so it's not, there is that uh, little spark of worry about him that he's never going to be like the supreme athlete he was in his early college career. But he's put together a good record so far in Bellator. He's 5-0, and slowly sort of working his way up against better and better competition. He came up through Legacy FC. He's now 2-0 in Bellator, and he's facing a guy in Anthony Dizzy, who I think it's a fighter. He's also a good young prospect, 5-0, 26, coming out of France. Um, and unfortunately for DZ, he's probably not quite as good an athlete and is very much a wrestling-based fighter. So you're going up wrestler to wrestler with a national champion and a guy out of the French circuit.
It's not good.
No. I mean, it should be a fun fight, and I imagine it'll be one that, it should be competitive. DZ, looks like a decent athlete and all that, but his striking, at least on the outside, isn't that great. He might have a better clinch game. And I just don't know that he'll be, if he's looking to go wrestle against Caldwell, I can't imagine he'll do that well.
So, for whatever it's worth, this happens all the time. Right now, my screen is frozen. I can hear you just fine, but visually, everything's frozen, and you have a very inquisitive look on your face. All FYI. So, if something happens, run the ship, man the helm, steer the boat.
Okay.
The last matchup we're going to talk about on the preliminary card is mostly for one guy, Sam Oropeza, a.k.a. Sammy O. Big crowd favorite, real likable guy. Had a real tough run in that he beat Cristiano Souza in the beginning of, must have been last season's welterweight tournament. And I believe he was scheduled to fight Andrei Koreshkov, but he was unable to make weight, which was, I mean, crippling, in many different areas. I'm sure Bellator wasn't too thrilled. They had to change up. I don't even remember what they ended up doing, but and I know Sammy O must have been crushed too. Really good guy, hard on the sleeve. Some might remember, because I remember it really well, his last loss was against Gidris Karavakias in Bellator. It was on the undercard, but Karavakias being a judoka, it was really a highlight reel finish. Took him down, got him in a Kesagatami or the scarf hold, and actually finished him with an arm lock with his legs. Fairly common in judo, extremely uncommon in MMA.
Yeah.
He's put together a real nice win streak. Hard nose, good striker. Has seemed to have really developed his power. He's always been a solid stand-up guy, but he's been putting cats to sleep lately. So I know he's going to be chomping at the bit to get back in there. Any thoughts on that matchup?
No, I mean I'm excited to watch it because yeah, Orprez is certainly he's a fun fighter to watch, especially coming out of Philadelphia Fight Factory, which produced Eddie Alvarez coming up, and oh Makovsky, I believe, was also out of there. If I'm thinking of the right camp, isn't that? Am
I
I
believe,
totally wrong?
yeah, I believe so. I want to. Nashon Burrell came to mind, but he might not train there. I know he's from Philly. But either
Yeah,
way,
Makovsky. It was the camp that produced Makovsky and Eddie Alvarez coming up.
and Samuel
So
kind of looked up to Eddie a little bit too. So I know that, not that they're best buddies, but I guess
yeah,
from. Go
but
ahead.
it's a camp with a good track record of producing fun, athletic fighters. That's what you're really looking at is
And gritty.
guys.
It's cliche, but all of those guys are real hard nosed. Nothing comes easy against them. Let's move on to the main card, 9 o'clock Eastern on Spike TV. Opening up the card, this should actually be a good one. Rick Hahn versus Dave Jansen. Rick Hahn, of course, former Olympic judoka. He has been kind of bouncing back and forth. Started at welterweight, had a couple of really tough and controversial losses. Moved down to lightweight,
Hmm.
worked his way all the way up to. I don't think Chandler was the champ then, but actually lost in somewhat surprising and
I
dominant
believe
fashion.
that what I thought that was Chandler's
It could have
one
been.
of his title defenses.
It could have been. With the whole Chandler and Alvarez thing, I'm not. I'm a little bit foggy on exactly who held the
Yeah,
belt. And,
that became a bit of a mess.
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it just went back and forth, and I'm not sure when this fight took place, but either way, surprisingly dominant
Yeah,
performance
it was his
by.
first title defense.
Okay, and it was a good one because
Yeah.
to me that was all about levels because I think Hahn was completely confident that Chandler could not or would have a lot of trouble taking him down, but he's so used to upright upper body work that Chandler's level changes just killed him. He could just not compensate for that.
Yeah.
So either way, he's back at lightweight. Oh, for whatever it's worth, I think he jumped as a late replacement into the last welterweight tournament and was down to fight Joe Tamanglo because he's a little guy. There would be no size difference. But then he ended up facing probably the biggest and lankiest, maybe welterweight in the game, in Douglas Lima. I think Lima cuts down from like 215 or 220.
Yeah, Lima's a big guy.
Not only big and strong, but tall, rangy, and usually when you have those two ingredients in the mix, a guy usually isn't like scorching fast and a nasty striker, and Lima is all those things. So this will be a good matchup, and really Dave Jansen, he's been out for a while. I think he had a knee surgery, but this is a cat that gets no love and attention. He's something in two, 15 and 2, 19 and 2.
19. Yeah, 19 and 2.
So definitely a sleeper and a guy who has a wrestling background, no really fancy credentials, but has really become competent with submissions from the front headlock. A lot of submission wins. I don't know what the betting lines are for this. They're not published yet, but I see this as fairly close, where I think most people will give it to Hahn. You?
Yeah, I think that Han is the more athletic fighter, like the more dynamic fighter. He just seems to have a little bit more of that sort of fast twitch muscle thing where he can shift on something really quickly. And Jansen, I mean, watching a little tape on him, he's a very three-dimensional fighter, a little bit sort of maybe reminds me of Mike Pyle a bit, guy who does everything pretty well but isn't maybe necessarily the most elite athlete or the most elite guy at any one thing, even though he's really solid everywhere. And but I think the big worry for me is just at what point does Rick Hahn start to seriously slow down? Like, is he hitting? Is he going to hit a wall? At which point, um, he starts to drop fights to guys that can challenge him at a pretty high level. And I'm not sure if he's there yet. I mean, I do think that Jansen's the kind of guy who's going to make it a really tough fight. He's probably not going to get knocked out or submitted. I mean, he's really scrappy on the ground. He's really, very solid on the feet. It's going to have to be like a grinding win for Rick Hahn if he's going to take it.
And I think grinding on the feet, which is, kind of It doesn't sound right, but he's good at that. He's really methodical. He never
Yeah.
overcommits. Actually, I really liked it when he first came up. He was getting kind of flashy with his kickboxing, a lot of spinning kicks, and he's really dialed that down to almost kind of like John Makdessi, where just real basic shit that works. Real strong, stiff, and smart boxing. He's not the kind of guy that has, Machida-esque elusiveness or is going to run away, but he does have a very good strategy of getting in and out. He'll never just stand in front of somebody. And usually this is at welterweight. One advantage is he was a lot quicker, both with his hands and his feet, which made that in and out movement really tough to deal with. And I agree with everything you said in that I think Hahn is definitely the better striker, but he's so smart and methodical about his striking. I think that will be a big advantage. But this is going to be a huge test for him because I do think Jansen can, to a degree, replicate the same strategy as Michael Chandler, which is going to be to either lock him up in the clinch and drop levels or shoot from outside. And if he gets him down, Rick Hahn did not look comfortable off his back. Of course, Michael Chandler was on top of him, but that could be big danger.
Yeah, I just don't see Dave Jansen as quite the same sort of elite athlete that Michael Chandler is. Where Chandler has a serious speed and strength advantage over most of the guys he fights.
Yeah, and really kind of incomparable because Chandler, it's not like he has this beautifully polished striking, but he throws that shit hard and in your face to the point
Yeah,
where you have to, you can't stand there. And I
yeah.
don't think Jansen can strike that kind of concern into Hahn with his striking. But at the same time, I wish I knew what the betting lines for this were, but I would give Hahn just a slight advantage just because
Mhm.
he's been more active. Jansen has not. Although if Jansen comes back in top form or even in better shape than he has been, I do think that he might have the chance for an upset here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's definitely a winnable fight for Dave Jansen. I don't look at Rick Hahn as the kind of guy that I don't watch Rick Hahn and think, oh, this guy's just gonna blow everybody out of the water. But he's been a very good fighter at a very high level, and except for fighting Michael Chandler and Douglas Lima and a split to Jay Huron way back in the day,
Very, very
or way back in
controversial at that.
2011,
Yeah.
he's not dropping any other fights, and obviously Jansen isn't either. But um, losses to Ricardo Lamas and Kamal Shalarus, even though those were also a long time ago. I mean, that's they're kind of similar in their athletic ability and even style a bit to Rick Hahn, at least in my mind.
Of course, his judo being an anomaly, but other than that,
Yeah.
they are fairly similar. I do think that Jansen will have a big advantage in transition and scrambles. He's crafty
Yeah.
in that kind of free-form grappling
I think
style.
if Rick Hahn tries to ends up making this a grappling battle, then he might have some problems.
Yep, totally agree. So moving on to our next one, I'm actually very excited. I think Bellator doesn't quite get the credit they deserve for back when Dana White plainly said women will never fight in the UFC. We talked about a little this last time, I guess, so I won't go back over it. But Bellator featured a lot of solid women's MMA fights. So for whatever reason, they went away from them, but they are bringing it back. And I don't think they could have had a better selection than Marlos Conan, veteran, tough as shit, fought all the top fighters. Mixed results, probably gets the most, I don't want to say attention, but very well documented her two losses against Cyborg Santos, which it's hard to draw conclusions from that because Cyborg is such an anomaly in MMA nowadays. But she's facing Annalisa Bucci, aka No Fear.
Hmm.
Uh, I have a little bit of background on her, but your general thoughts on, I guess, both this matchup, Conan coming back, and opening the doors on the women's division again.
Well, I mean, it's amazing how long Conan's been fighting. I mean, she made her debut in 2000, so we're coming up 15 years that Marlis Conan has been in women's MMA. She's still only 33. Um, Fortunately for her, her style tends to be, when she's not fighting Cyborg, she's not a damage sponge. She doesn't take a lot of hard shots. She's a very dominant positional grappler and a solid, if unathletic kickboxer. Um, and this feels to me like the kind of fight that she probably is still very like she shouldn't have any reason to lose this fight. Bucci watching a little tape on her. I mean, she's very much prototypical of the woman's MMA um, sort of rank and file in that she prefers to be a clinch and inside fighter. She prefers cage control, and she doesn't have a big takedown game or power game to speak of. And Conan's very crafty. She's very good at taking on fighters who like to engage inside and getting them to the ground and then working them over on the ground. So it's very much a tailor made to fit Conan's strengths. It's just too bad that she's not going to be fighting Julia Budd, who is very much a powerhouse and very much capable of being competitive everywhere.
So, actually, so for Annalisa Bucci, and I didn't know any of this, but she's Italian,
Hmm.
and she's got some pretty fancy striking credentials. She's a five-time Italian K1 champion, of course, vastly different than the world K1 accolades. Three-time Italian Muay Thai champion. Actually, she's got an ISKA, full contact karate championship. Um, she does also have listed a 2013 Italian grappling champion. So, you can't put a ton of emphasis on a lot of that, except for I would say being an Italian K1 champion. I mean, that's definitely something of note and of worth. Overall, I think this boils down to though is, Conan isn't known for her striking, but she came up with the Golden Glory team, so she's far from unaware on striking mechanics. To me, even though she's not like a powerhouse takedown artist, either in the clinch or with wrestling, she's crafty, kind of like in that Talis Lightis kind of way, where she'll just find a way. But she has just phenomenal scrappling. I think scrambling. She might be one of I think, the feistiest and craftiest grapplers as far as scrambles and transitions. Excellent back takes. Can you think of a lot of in in strictly that standpoint, transitions, scrambles? Can you think of a lot of female fighters that are more talented or more, I guess,
No, I
wary,
mean
crafty?
basically Ronda Rousey and um, yeah, I think there are. Oh, and maybe like Claudia Gadelha or a couple other of the strawweight women coming out right now. There are a lot of really solid athletes there. But no, I mean she's a terrific grappler and she's got a really fun game. And I just think even, unfortunately, Bucci's credentials, whether they are terribly meaningful for herself as a striker or not, they actually make me a little more worried for her in this fight, just because, she might be coming out looking to press a serious striking advantage and end up on her back a lot.
So my entire computer's frozen right now. Just another FYI, but everything
Okay.
I can still hear and see. You're still frozen with that inquisitive look. So two fights left. In both of these kind of attest to why maybe it's not safe to say everyone from the UK can't wrestle or can't grapple. I'm looking at you, Kid Nate, when I say that. First up is heavyweights. Bobby Lashley. He's taken on a cat named Carl Etherington. Carl has actually some pretty solid. Again, this is kind of the theme for the show with past credentials. He's got excellent credentials, but they are all kind of limited to his specific geography. He's a British junior champion in judo, a British sambo champion, both combat and sports sambo. He does have some wrestling experience as well. I believe maybe someone can clue us in, but he's listed as a traditional wrestling, in quotes, world champion. I'm not positive. I believe that's like the American equivalent to freestyle wrestling. European BJJ champion, British BJJ champion, both gi and no gi. And I believe he's been awarded the title of Master of Sport in both combat and sports sambo. Again, can't say it enough. I think he is competing in the World Sambo event, so that won't be I guess restricted to just his his geography. But so either way, very encouraging. Doesn't mean everything, but coming up against a guy like Bobby Lashley, it would seem that Etherington could be the guy that can at least contest the girth and explosive takedowns of Bobby Lashley. Yeah,
Oh yeah. I mean, I think Etherington has a very serious Chad Griggs-like shot at victory here. Um,
good comparison too.
yeah, like Lashley doesn't do anything well beyond being a hulk of a man. You know, he's not a good wrestler. He's not a good striker. He's not really good at anything except, using his immense power to drag guys to the ground and then get on top of them and plug away with small and not terribly damaging shots until they're forced to tap out
You
or
don't think he's a
continue
good wrestler?
mission.
You wouldn't call Lashley a good wrestler?
No, I don't. I mean, that fight against Josh Burns, he got 2 or 3 takedowns stuffed in that fight. I'm pretty sure.
Did he? I thought that was one where he took him down at will, and I was a little, not that it was huge, but especially harkening back to the Griggs fight, I thought his instincts for submission grappling were there. Not that it was huge, but he was leaning over for that Kimura. When it wasn't there, he'd stop and throw elbows and then go back to it. And I believe, how did he finish that? He finished with a submission, right?
Uh, against wait, who?
Josh Burns.
Oh,
Josh.
Burns. Yeah, he got the rear naked choke eventually.
All right. For
But
whatever. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, but I mean, it just a lot of what he does is not terribly effective outside of his incredible power, I would
For what-
say.
for whatever it's worth, he was a NAI National Wrestling Champion 2 times.
Yeah, a decade ago. No,
More,
20
'97 and
years ago.
'98. Yeah. But either way, to me, it kind of goes with his athleticism because we're talking heavyweights here. So guys are as big as him, but I mean, huge, monumental advantage in quickness, agility, things like that. And then on top of that, having some solid, wrestling competency as well. That makes him a tough, tough matchup. Just it's tough to keep him off you, and he's the
Yeah.
kind of guy that will keep shooting until he gets it.
Yeah, I mean, he's more athletic than 90% of the guys he's going to face. He's almost certainly looks more athletic than Carl Etherington. And unfortunately, Etherington, from what footage I've seen, he's another guy he's reasonably decent athlete. He's kind of a smallish heavyweight, makes him a little quicker. Um, but he's very wild, he's more aggressive than he is polished. He's the kind of guy that loses dominant grappling positions pretty easily, doesn't have a great deal of striking on the outside, so tends to want to get locked up in the clinch and try and work from there. And I can't see a smallish heavyweight really finding a lot of success inside against Bobby Lashley.
Yeah, so that speed advantage isn't really. I mean, he could have a speed advantage, but his tendency is just to go in and lock up, and
Yeah.
that's probably playing right into Lashley's hands.
Yeah, I mean, so like I say, he's got the Griggs-like chance of winning, especially if Lashley gasses himself out, because, like I say, he works so hard to get things done. Is just, my feeling watching him is like he'll pursue that takedown, and if it doesn't come, he'll just, he'll basically end up lifting the guy up and throwing him down, or he'll end up working for these submissions, and they're all power submissions. A lot of the time, it's key locks and straight arm bars and stuff like that, and just the kind of things that are very much prone to burning out somebody with a limited gas tank. So if he tires himself out going after Etherington, I think is definitely the kind of scrappy, tough guy who could hang out and come back for a big win.
And I believe Etherington has never been out of the first round, correct?
Yeah, he's won all of his fights inside the first round. All of them against very poor competition, but
Yeah.
it's the kind of result you want to see against poor competition. If you're not going to
Exactly.
be the best guys, you should be blowing them out of the water.
Although in this case, I brought that up because this might be one where he might be at a disadvantage the longer the fight
It could be.
goes.
I mean, he's kind of a smaller guy, though. Like, he's 6'1",
Yeah.
and he doesn't seem to carry around a huge amount of muscle. But yeah, you never know.
So he's going to have to get real creative because he's not going to want to lock horns and get into a strength for strength battle with Bobby Lashley. So that's when I think maybe a lot of his sambo and judo experience might be of note, just
Yeah.
because anything other than just digging underhooks and stopping Bobby's takedowns and resetting. I mean, if he can get his footing and just keep him at bay with by going for little inside trips or just establishing some kind of threat, so Lashley knows he can't just come forward and steamroll the guy. But I'm kind of leaning Lashley here, but I'm open to see what Carl Etherington can do.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean it's the kind of fight that makes a bunch of sense. I think it makes sense for Lashley to face. It's the kind of guy who's similar in age, similar in experience, and similar in skill, quite honestly, and could beat him, probably won't, but very easily could.
And either way, definitely worth a watch.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move on to our main event now. This is Emmanuel Newton. He's taking on a guy called Linton Vassell. I assume a lot of people aren't going to be too familiar with him, but he's a big boy and another guy out of the UK who is a grappling specialist. He's
Mhm.
not afraid to strike. I wouldn't call it very polished, but eventually he just keeps coming forward until he collides with his opponent, and he is like a not a finesse guy. He is a powerful
Mhm.
slam, takedown, power pass, to half guard and then to mount. He's not really a power striker from on top. He's
No.
not the kind of guy that will establish a strong base, posture up, and like level big shots. But I guess his nickname is the Swarm. That's kind of his style. He'll get on
Yep.
top, hold you there, and just keep pounding the hell out of you. Um, Not so sure, considering both of our opinions on his striking and his entries, how successful that'll be against Emmanuel Newton.
Yeah, I mean, there's a serious chance that if he gets scared off of the first couple shots, if because I mean, Newton's takedown defense is very good. It's a very, underrated quality part of his game is his ability to stop the takedown. Um, if he can, and to stand back up when he does get taken down, if he can make Vassell wary of working for that, if he can land punches, scare him off a little, then this ends up being a very rough fight for Vassell, I think. Of course, the other half of that is, though, like we said, I mean, swarming Emmanuel Newton is how you have success against Emmanuel Newton.
Yeah, and Vassell's a big boy too,
Yeah.
like 6'4". Is that right?
6'4". And something I'm definitely interested in too out of it is that he didn't really start getting to train full time until he went to Bellator. So it's only in like the past 2 years that he's been able to be in the gym full time working on his skills. So
And doesn't that coincide with like a 6 or 7 or 8 fight win streak too?
he's on a 9 fight win streak right now. So
There you go. Stems about 2 years back, right?
yeah, it's back to 2011. So
Okay. So kind of what we spent a lot of time talking about the Beltran Newton fight, and this is a good example where if Newton allows that same thing, that he'll have a Linton Vassell in his face, who's not a tall guy throwing volume strikes with a good chin. I mean, every time he closes that gap, he's going to look to lock up.
hmm
That'll, number one, if he can tie up with him, perhaps reduce some of Newton's striking venom, because if he's tied up, he doesn't have that movement. He can't hit those funny angles. So this is, I mean, it's a good theme the way we open the show, because this should be classic Newton with movement, not allowing himself to be cornered. He does have phenomenal takedown defense. I would say half of that is his movement. He's hard to get in a good
yeah,
spot. Even if you kind of trap him against the cage, he can still throw a feint, cut an angle, and get loose. And once you do completely lock him up to the point where he has to physically defend, he's got pretty solid takedown defense and good get-ups too.
yeah, he does. I think. I mean, I think the biggest worry would be if he actually ends up on the ground. He's an aggressive. Newton's an aggressive grappler, but he's not the most polished grappler in the world. He's the kind of guy who will end up going for something, going for a rear naked choke or going for position, an aggressive position, and often and can give up bad positions because of it. And if Vassell can force him down and keep him on the ground and make Newton work there for any length of time, that may be his real advantage in the fight.
I don't recall seeing Emmanuel Newton on his back or working off his back often or for any length of time.
No, he's very good at getting up, so it'll be a tough spot.
I can't, I can't even really think of anyone that's taken him down,
I think King Mo might have in their first fight
but he
once
got
or
right
twice.
back up.
Yeah, and he got right back up.
And he's crafty too. The same kind of unorthodox and awkward mentality he has on the feet. When he gets in his guard, he will go for something and commit to it. And whether or not it works, he can usually create enough space to, post an arm, take a knee, and get up after that. So very, very feisty.
Yeah,
You got to go with Newton here. I mean,
yeah.
this could actually be a really rough matchup. To me, it's all about Vassell. This is a way to find out how dominant his grappling truly is. And to me, half the battle is not just that. He's got to use the footwork and the entries to even be able to get his hands on Newton to try to impose that grappling. And that's my big concern with Newton's unusual movement.
Well, I mean, I think that, like I say, unfortunately, and the reason that I'm not more, willing to pick Vassell to win this necessarily is that there was a lot to be learned from that um, Joey Beltran fight. Like Joey Beltran laid out a pretty clear plan for beating Emmanuel Newton. Like this is how you do it. And I talked to Vassell a little bit about it, or briefly. We went back and forth about it a little, and he talked about that he watched the fight and that he didn't think that Newton won it up until right at the end, was winning it until right up at the end, but that he also hasn't like really adjusted his camp in any way for fighting Newton. And I think that Newton is the kind of fighter that you have to plan around specifically.
Isn't that common? I think I mentioned that before. Younger
Yeah.
guys coming up, they always have the I'm not worried about him, I just need to worry about myself.
Well, it's just a common fighter thing altogether. I mean, Vassell's been fighting forever. He's been fighting since 2008. He's 7 years into his pro career. He's been around long enough to know. But I mean, I think a big common thing for a lot of fighters is if they never quite hit that elite level, it's the idea of like, I'm comfortable. I need to do what's comfortable and what I know works for me. That's what's important to work on. And so guys like, they develop a style that they feel comfortable with, that they feel like works for them, and then they don't want to do anything to disrupt that style. They don't want to get into like, oh, I'm going to look at this, this opponent and say, well, how do I need to change things to worry about what he does well? It's like, well, I want my camp to go well, and the way my camp goes well is if I'm doing everything I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, it seems like as soon as you take not only a big loss or a high profile loss, but a strategic loss, that's when usually that methodology changes a little bit. But hell, who am I to talk? Either way, I'm kind of looking forward to this one too. Even if Vassell comes out, no one knows who this cat is.
Yeah.
Even if he comes out and makes some waves, does something memorable, puts on a good show, he can kind of take at least a small victory or a little bit of consolation in that. So that's all for me. You got anything else you want to close with?
No, I mean, I think you know, that's the bulk of it. It's a great card, honestly. It's a card that's a lot of fun. It's a huge step up from last week's Bellator card. Um,
Which was a rough one.
yeah, it was a rough one. And this one should be great. Top to bottom, it's full of fun fights with fun fighters. So I'm looking forward to it.
Cool, cool. All right, we're gonna wrap it up, or I'm gonna try to. I'm still completely frozen here, so I'm just gonna have to close all my internet. If something kooky happens, Zane, handle it. Otherwise, it's on you.
It looks like I can stop the broadcast on my end too. So
All right, so we'll synchronize our pace watches. But either way, viewers, thank you. Appreciate it. We'll be back Thursday, Zane and I, because everyone else on the staff are ill-tempered, unwashed cretins. So
yeah,
we're gonna do the UFC Vivisection Tomorrow? Is that tomorrow? 2 o'clock? Right on. All right, so tune in. Zane, you hit that big red button and say your goodbyes.
All right. Adios, everybody.